Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the X-Files Season 2 episode 20. It's called Humbug. So spoilers for the episode as always. So this is a little bit different of an X-Files episode in that this might be the first one. I mean, people can correct me if I'm misremembering an episode, but I think this is the first episode I would say is just outright a comedy. Obviously there's moments of comedy in several episodes. It's not been that strange to have a little quippy moment between Mulder and Scully or something, but this episode I would say is mostly comedy. Yes, there's murders going on and there's other things happening, but by and large, it felt like the tone and just the way it kept coming back to some running gags even. I mean, even that, it's got running gags, is kind of different and makes for a unique X-Files episode. Admittedly, I don't know if I quite get why it's as highly rated as it is on IMDb. It's up at an 8.6, which feels a bit high. That feels like what some of the really important episodes feel like. But I can't deny that it wasn't fun and that I wasn't successfully laughing at some of the intentional jokes. I laughed quite a bit, actually, throughout this episode. It does make it interesting to think about, though, compared to other episodes that are good, in the sense that I don't know if this could ever feel to me like it's hitting like the high notes that a genuinely good mystery episode or horror episode or like a really important episode for the ongoing like Mulder Scully plot or whatever it may be. Because ultimately, with its tone, it can't be like those episodes. It's supposed to be kind of a standalone, funny episode. Although, to be fair to it, it does kind of bring up a couple of ideas that are a bit more nuanced. For example, this episode deals with circus performers, people with abnormalities, physical defects of some kind. And there is an interesting scene where they kind of both realize, Mulder and Scully, that they're effectively racially profiling someone because they're assuming that because he never was honest that he used to be a wolf boy or a dog face boy or whatever the correct term is for the act, that he might be the murderer, but they realize they're kind of discriminating by even having that thought. And it actually felt kind of interesting for the writing to point that out and for have the characters to kind of notice that they're doing it, go about it anyway, because they're not because they're sure of it, but because they're actually kind of lost for leads. They don't really know where to look, so they figure they might as well check it out and keep going with it. But having that moment of reflection, I thought was quite a pointed little moment for the characters. And then they even have a good successful bit of comedy out of it when they're caught digging up something that this guy, the sheriff, who used to be the dogface boy, when he catches them digging up what he buried like 10 minutes ago, Scully really awkwardly tries to give him a proper reason as to why they're investigating him, like tries to come up with some jargon that she's been taught at the academy that justifies what they're doing. It's clearly flatlining, and then Mulder just jumps in and says, "Oh, we found out you used to be a dog-faced boy." Like, that was a funny moment. Like, it worked. And the guy's reaction was fine as well. Like all of it kind of amounted to feeling like we could explore some ideas without it feeling too heavy of an episode, which I do kind of appreciate and think that it pulls off some of that stuff. But to be honest, because it is such a different, more comedic leading episode of the X-Files, I didn't know how to take the tone early on. You know, early on, they do like a fake out where the opening kill scene, you think some monstrous man is attacking these two kids in a pool, but it turns out that this is actually the kid's dad, and he's got a skin condition, and he works in the circus or the sideshow act as a crocodile man or alligator man, and that's kind of his act. But this is just how he looks, and he's a loving father, right? And it's almost like it's making the audience do what Mulder and Scully do later, is that it makes the audience have an assumption based on what it's showing us. And to be fair, the camera work is heavily implying that there's some sinister stuff going on at first. But then it's like, no, you're wrong for assuming this man was dangerous. He's a perfectly nice man who just happens to look different. But then he's attacked by an actual monster. And then, of course, the fact that the actual monster ends up being very similar to the movie Basket Case, which I kind of saw coming at a certain point, because they introduced this conjoined twin thing a chunk into the episode. But like I was saying, though, Mulder and Scully, they're talking about the murders, and Mulder's like, oh, this is like a series of crimes over the past 30 years, blah, 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 blah. and she takes it very seriously. She notably says, "Imagine spending your life looking like that." I'm only bringing that up because that line comes back at the very end in a very different context, which I also thought was a neat little bookend of writing. But the scene that I was not sure how to take this episode, and I really didn't know if I was going to like it, is the scene at the funeral, where Mulder and Scully arrive at the funeral of this man that was murdered in the opening scene, and they kind of look around and slowly realize that almost everyone at the funeral is someone who would be in the sideshow. So you've got some little people, you've got like his wife is the bearded lady, you've got, things of that nature. And there's one point when the reverend or whoever it is giving delivering the funeral, and you realize that he doesn't have any arms. So there's this moment where he brings up his foot to turn the page of his Bible or whatever. The whole thing's just got this absurd feeling to it. And I'm like, I don't know where to go with this. And there's a little joke moment where Mulder sort of looks over to his side and the guy sitting next to him's like 8 foot tall and he's sort of looking up like feeling weird. It's all very like bizarre in a tonal way for X-Files that feels very different to anything that's come before. And then to top it all off, there's this over-the-top sequence where the coffin starts shaking, the people at the funeral move it out the way, and then eventually it's revealed that there's someone digging up from underground, and it's one of the sideshow performers, this guy who does like all the pain stuff and whatnot. But he like comes out of the ground and then stabs himself effectively as an act, and everyone sort of carts him off and whatever. And we get this moment where everyone just leaves, but Mulder and Scully are still just sitting there in shock at the absurd events that have just happened around them. And I wasn't sure how to feel about anything that was happening. But then Mulder said, "I can't wait for the wake." And that made me laugh. It was almost like, you know how in like a movie or a TV show where you'll have like a super serious tense scene, and then they'll quite smartly insert a little moment of comic relief to break the tension, and it kind of, it balances things out. It gives the audience a chance to feel better again, and doesn't, stops you from feeling too tense all the time. This almost did that for me. This was almost a tension breaker in a weird meta way, where I didn't really know how to feel about anything that had just happened because it was so absurd and weird. And then Mulder cracked that joke to show that he's even feeling that this is weird. And all of a sudden I felt like, you know what? The characters are feeling the way I am right now. And therefore it was easier from that point on to kind of just enjoy what the episode was. And like I said, it kind of brings up some interesting ideas. Almost the very next scene, they're sitting with the sheriff and talking about how this town is mostly made up of this sideshow act. And Scully starts theorizing about who the killer could be. And this sheriff, who looks normal, obviously later on we find out he used to be the dog-faced boy before his hair fell out, but he interjects quite quickly and effectively chastises Scully and says, "No, wait. These people might look different, but that, they're as normal on the inside as anyone else, so you can't just assume they're killers." And I actually really like Scully's response to this, which is, like, yeah, but if they're normal, almost all serial killers are, like, claimed to seem normal by people who knew them, right? So many serial killers, once we find out who they are, their family and their friends say, "I could never have imagined he would do that because he seemed like such a normal, nice person." So and I thought that was an interesting argument in saying, hey, so if they're normal, then you also have to accept there's a chance they could be this. But I also understood it from the sheriff's perspective, is that he seemed obviously is used to these people being constantly, demonized and assumptions being made of who they are just because they look different. So I completely understand his perspective here and why he's defending them, but also Scully's logic also makes a lot of sense that we can't exclude them as a possibility because of that. So I thought that was interesting. So, and then that kind of sets up the idea of thinking about it in that context. Like, are they being, are they making assumptions? Are they being prejudiced by assuming certain things later on, by assuming it has to be a circus act? Which, to be fair, as the episode goes on, we see the killer, whoever they are, is squeezing in very tight spaces. So they think contortionist at one point, and then they think something else. But so it's clear that there is something that's not normal about whoever's committing these crimes. And like I said, it turns out to be the conjoined twin of the other guy, the actor that I recognize from various things. His name's Vincent Scavalli. I've definitely seen him in stuff. The other notable guest star here, of course, is Michael J. Anderson, who is from Twin Peaks. Which also brings in the theme of the prejudice, where Mulder keeps offending him throughout the episode. It's really only twice. I thought they was going to do it a third time, but the character gets killed off. He's one of the victims before we get a chance for a third. But Mulder, when he meets Anderson's character, who happens to run the not a motel, I guess like trailer park, which is functioning like a hotel, for lack of a better term. They get some trailers for themselves, and Mulder says, "Oh, were you ever in the sideshow act?" And this character quite rightly says, "Why would you assume that? What about me?" And Mulder tries to defend himself by saying, "Well, we were speaking to the sheriff, and most people in this town apparently have been in the act." But he gets chewed out for it, and Mulder has to kind of apologize, and it's a whole awkward moment. And I thought, okay, it was just a moment on its own. I didn't really think much of it. But then later on, there's a scene where Mulder, after they've been investigating stuff, is going to Scully's trailer. Anderson's character was underneath the trailer, and he comes out with some tools in his hand. And Mulder's like, "Does Agent Scully know you're under our trailer dealing with plumbing right now?" And Anderson is like, "What? You're just assuming I'm a pervert, that I can't get attention from women, so I have to be a peeping Tom? Is that what you're assuming right now? I'll have you know that some women find it fascinating of a man of my stature," or something like that. He goes on a little rant. And of course, the payoff to this moment is Scully sticking her head out the door after the conversation's over, and she says, "Is Mr. So-and-so done with the plumbing yet?" Implying that, yes, this was always something that was completely fine. She knew he was out there. She'd asked for plumbing to be fixed, and this was just Mulder making an ass of himself. And Mulder does make an ass of himself a couple of times in this episode, and it's actually kind of nice to see him making an ass of himself, because he, often just assumes things, and he's right about things, so it's nice for him to get some things wrong. Although, having said that, there is a nice moment in this episode where Scully is the one who's convinced it's the conjoined twin, and thinks that that's who the killer is. And some people don't believe her. The sheriff even makes a joke about this mermaid that they've brought up a couple of times as this urban myth, and says, well, maybe it was the mermaid, maybe it did this and went back into the water. And Mulder just walks past Scully and says, "Now you know how I feel," because this is clearly the sort of shit that Mulder gets every time he's got a theory about something from all the skeptics. So now Scully gets to feel that. So, yeah, I mean, as far as it feels more like a collection of interesting scenes on their own, so much as a full whole of an episode to me, but, all memorable kind of moments. I already kind of brought up the scene where they find out the sheriff was a dog-faced boy, and they go digging up what he buried, and it turns out to just be a potato. Nothing malicious at all. So that's a whole scene, which I said is very good, because it kind of has them questioning the prejudice that they're maybe engaging in by doing this. But also, at the end of the scene, the sheriff says, "Hey, this investigation's not going so well, is it?" And kind of acknowledging that the reason why they kept going even once they had that realization is because they don't really have any other leads, and they're just looking into everyone at this point. So there's a scene where the guy who does all the pain stuff, he offers Scully a bug, or I can't remember what the bug was, but so there's this other guy who's got jigsaw tattoos who eats stuff, right? And the first time we see him, Mulder sees him coming out of the river eating a fish that he's caught. And he's very sort of rabid and kind of, well, not rabid, that's not the right word, but he comes across as very creature-like, the way he's hunting down animals. He chases a dog later on, and of course there's the comedic ending that's implied heavily that he actually has eaten the murderer at the end, that the conjoined twin came after him towards the end of the episode. And then the next time we see him, he's lying on the ground and his stomach looks very full. And he makes a little joke right at the end of the episode that he feels not so good. It must be something he ate. Which, by the way, is the only time I think he speaks in the whole episode. I didn't think he could speak. I thought he was mute the entire episode. And at the very end, as they're driving off, he just turns to Mulder and Scully and says, "Must be something I ate." And then we end on a comedy beat of Mulder and Scully looking at each other like, wait, is he implying that he ate the killer? So, fun ending. But yeah, I wanted to get to this scene because there's a scene here where he feeds the guy with the jigsaw tattoos a bug, and then he says, "Oh, pardon my manners," and he puts the jar over to Scully, and Scully takes one out and seemingly eats it. and just walks off like it's normal. And I love this little moment because it was just kind of wild on its own that she would do this. And then Mulder just like follows her, staring at her like, what the hell, Scully? What did you just do? And then Scully just reveals that she didn't actually eat it. She just used a sleight of hand. She still has it in her palm. And it's just a fun little moment more than anything else. But the moment where she seems to eat the bug is a genuine, what the hell, Scully? That's weird. Why are you doing that? It sticks out. It sticks out as a nice little moment. There's also a couple of other scenes worth mentioning. Scully goes to this sort of little museum place where she basically just gets hustled for some donation money. But this is where she learns about conjoined twins, which really definitely sets up that the conjoined twin character is going to be important, that this is a big deal, and that conjoined twins often can't survive if they get separated. But of course, this little mutant conjoined twin that's attached to Lenny is the character's name. He obviously can separate. Lanny passes away when he's waiting in the jail cell that night after he separates. All of the final showdown stuff before the conjoined twin gets to the puzzle tattoo guy who eats him, seemingly, all takes place in like a haunted house or a fun house, whatever you want to call it. Although the guy that built this place, who actually ends up being the second victim earlier on in the episode, he did not like that being called that. He thought he was doing serious art where he was scaring the shit out of people. But yeah. Like, that's the thing, like, I'm jumping around all over the place because I don't really feel the need to go that much in order for this episode, because like I said, it's mostly just a lot of interesting scenes that are mostly on their own. Barring the through line, of course, of like the idea of how they're suspecting these people, any prejudice, and sort of thinking about how they're tackling this situation, and the themes of being different. It's especially funny because there's the guy who hurts himself. What's his name? If I get his name here. Dr. Blockhead? Is that his name? I don't think I even noticed that. But yeah, Dr. Blockhead, he, he's the one that offers the bugs, he's the one that climbs out of the grave, all that. But there's a moment throughout the episode, or towards the end of the episode, when he's the one driving away with the Jigsaw guy, because that's his, like, I don't know, sidekick, I guess. His protege, whatever you want to call it. Kind of tying into something that happened earlier. Back when Mulder first met Mr. Nut, which is Anderson from Twin Peaks, his character, and he made the assumption that he must have been in the sideshow or the circus before. Mr. Nut got offended, and Mr. Nut said, hey, imagine I did the same to you. Imagine that I assume because you have a really normal, crappy tie and a suit that you would work for the government. Hell, I probably would just assume you work for the FBI. And then Mulder has to, like, go, I do work for the FBI, and whips out his badge. That kind of comes back up at the end with this other character, Dr. Blockhead, who is talking to Scully and is, like, basically talking about how, you know, people are going to try and take out any, like, variants, and, like, you know, Siamese twins and things like that probably won't happen anymore once, like, genetics, like, really takes off in the 21st century. And it's kind of sad that that'll be the case because nature has anomalies. Nature doesn't just have the standard all the time. It's a mystery as to why. And then he goes, look at that guy, and it's Mulder. He's looking at Mulder, who's standing over next to one of the trailers. And what I loved about this that made it really funny to me is that when he says, I mean, look at that guy, and it cuts to Mulder, and not only is it Mulder, which is funny in and of itself, but he's got one foot up on a step, like he's posing for like a photo shoot. So it kind of adds to the hilarity of the point that he's making, which is that, look at that guy, he's a normal, boring, typical dude, right? He's a typical, boring, handsome asshole, and that's all he's ever going to be. Nah, F that. That's not what we want to be. We want to be unique. We want to be different. We want to be weird. I think that's extra funny because Mulder, of course, as we know him, is the weirdo, right? To the rest of the FBI, he is the one who is got the crazy ideas and the theories. They treat him like he's the sideshow character. And that's kind of funny that we put Mulder in this position where he comes across as the stiff, as the government stooge who's acting like he's the conservative, and everyone else is looking at him like they feel that they're being judged by him, which is just kind of funny to flip that on its head a little bit and show that there's layers and levels. Like, to one person, you know, it's like someone to someone else looks rich, but that rich person looks like a pauper next to like the ultra rich kind of thing. Like, you know, you have levels to this kind of stuff. Another little scene that I wanted to mention, which I don't really know if I like it or not, because it's a little bit out of nowhere, but I kind of get the point they're trying to make as well. So it's the morning after they first moved into this trailer park, and Lanny, the sort of the main bigger half of the conjoined twins, he comes to wake up Scully for something, to tell her that something's going on. And she answers the door and she's put on a bathrobe. And she answers the door and he's also standing there kind of in a bathrobe. And it's kind of open and you can kind of see a little bit of the conjoined twin. Like you can see kind of where it connects to his body. And it's a whole little thing where she's kind of like staring at it a little bit and she's realizing she's staring at it. But at the same time, they do this thing where he's kind of staring at her boob. Like, she's not that exposed, but the bathrobe's a little bit to the side, and you can see a little bit of the bra or whatever. And he's kind of staring at that. And she kind of notices and like sort of like, you know, tightens up her bathrobe and covers up. And at the exact same time, he notices what she's looking at, and he covers up himself with his bathrobe. And I thought it was an interesting little moment. I think it felt weird to me at first because there was no indication before then that there was going to be any kind of theme where they were ogling at Scully, right? The closest that anything came was when Anderson's character that Mulder offended kind of assumed that's what Mulder thought of him, but nothing was actually happening. So the whole idea that he's actually just kind of staring at her boob like he's in a trance because, oh, attractive woman, like I'm, you know, and oh, I'm gobsmacked. I can't even think straight. Like that felt a little bit out of nowhere. But I think at the same time though, by the end of this little scene, I kind of appreciate like what they're doing here, that both of them are covering up because both of them feel conscious about what the other one's looking at. And how one of them is a very normal thing that you know, every woman in some level has to deal with. But then the other one's is this different thing that's very unique and most people don't have, kind of, you know, like I thought it was an interesting moment for her to kind of relate to in a sense, even though of course staring at the conjoined twins is very different from someone staring because of a sexual attraction. Obviously that's a very different thing, but sticking out for any reason and people ogling at it for whatever the reason may be, whether it be fascination, whether it be perversion, whether it be whatever, there is a through line through all of that of attention that's unwanted. And even it's not really explored too much, but there is a little bit of a question that's raised in here about people who become performers because they can't really do anything else, but they then have to like basically let strangers ogle at their differences. And for some of them that might not be so bad, but for some of them it's probably preying on something they actually feel quite self-conscious about. And you know, there's definitely some rumblings in the episode that are kind of alluding to that stuff, but it doesn't really go into it too heavily. Maybe that would be like what would send the episode into the stratosphere, is if it could really start to nail that stuff. All right, honestly, even like going further down the path of like the possibility of prejudice and who to suspect here would be interesting in and of itself. But as it is though, the episode is funny. There's a lot of moments that made me laugh. Typically Mulder or Scully's reaction to certain moments. There's some fun little bits here or there. There's, you know, if anything, the big climax where they're chasing the conjoined twin through the haunted house type thing, there's a little bit of hilarity because like Mulder just comes through a chute at one point and lands in front of Scully. But for the most part, because the threat of the villain is not that serious in this episode, you know, from an audience perspective compared to more, you know, horror-focused episodes where it takes itself very seriously, because this has been a lot more lighthearted, once it has to treat the threat like the threat that it is and they have to go and get it, it's probably the least interesting the episode gets. But as far as like all of their interactions with everyone in this town and they're just sort of dealing with all the little things, in fact, actually one of the other lines that really made me laugh is when Mr. Blockhead is being questioned by Mulder and Scully. This is right before he offers the bug to Scully. He brings up a different type of act who can bring their testicles right into their stomach. It's like I don't know, like someone who is like some sort of fancy contortionist or something. And as soon as he says it, Mulder says, "I'm doing that right now." And that line made me laugh. Like, there's a lot of little bits there that are quite funny, and it is interesting seeing Mulder feel like he's the one judging others for being weird. Not that he's being a prick towards people. If anything, he's the one who points out to Scully that maybe we're being prejudiced here, but it's kind of interesting to see him in that role where maybe he even falls into the trap of thinking he's the normal one surrounded by others and falls into some pitfalls. Not in a malicious way, but just that, yeah, there's some ignorance, there's whatever. Yeah, so that said, though, I do think it's maybe a little overrated in IMDb. I think it's a fun episode. I think it's quirky. I think it's saying some, or at least approaching some interesting topics, if not saying interesting things. But after the last two, which were kind of relative duds to varying degrees, this was definitely a little bit more interesting. It's not a classic X-Files episode that I look forward to in the sense that when I go in hoping for a great X-Files episode, there's definitely something more like normal that I have in my mind that we've had before that's been more consistent as opposed to this. But still, breath of fresh air, something a little bit different. I can't really complain too much. So that is that. And I forgot to do this in the last episode, maybe even the last two episodes, but I should pick a scene of the week. And I will go with... I really like Mulder saying I can't wait for the wake at the end of the funeral scene. But I think I've got to go with Scully pretending to eat the bug because it was a genuine what the F moment. And then the glee that she had on her face as she gets to reveal that she just tricked him was entertaining. I like that. So, yeah, that's my scene of the week. But that is my thoughts on this X-Files. Let's have a look and see what's coming next time. Episode 21 is called the Kalusari. Here's the description in IMDb. The agents investigate when a young boy's family is plagued by a series of tragic accidents. Oh, is this an evil child episode? The photographs of a child, and he looks a bit evil. So, I suspect the kid's doing it, maybe with superpowers of some kind. He's killing everyone around him, or maybe not killing, but hurting people around him, perhaps. Maybe it'll elevate to death by the end of the episode. I mean, X-Files has had some success with evil kids. Sometimes it's been success in not in a genuinely good way, but more in a, this is kind of bad, but in a funny, awesome way. So if I get either of those types of good, I'll be happy enough with the next episode. But we'll see how it goes. So thank you very much for joining me. Of course, you can like, subscribe, all the usual stuff, and you can support all the content and help keep all the reviews coming, both in MailFuzz TV, all the movie podcasts over in MailFuzz Movies, by supporting over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and, doing that over there. And you can, of course, also do YouTube memberships if that's more your thing, or super thanks, super chats, whatever. But thank you very much. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?